This particular profession is more of a vocation for me. It's not something I thought I was going to be doing with my life. But when I look back at my childhood, it all makes a lot of sense. I was that little kid that adults would talk to and confide in. I wanted to sit, in like the corner of the kitchen when my mom had her friends over to hear what the adults were talking about, not because I felt excluded or wanted to be a part of the party, more because I was intrigued about what was happening in people's lives and just wanted to understand humans and the way they thought and what made them tick.
Have you ever wondered if the challenges faced by CEOs, business leaders, whether leading a Fortune 500 company or a startup or a very small micro company might possibly share any common ground? In this episode, I'll be chatting with Chrisa Boyce. Chrisa is, among other things, a former senior executive at a Fortune 500 company, a speaker, an executive coach, a leadership expert, and a fractional chief operating officer. So we'll be hearing more about all of those things very soon. We'll be exploring the similarities and differences in leading those diverse types of companies and teams. We'll be delving into the importance behind understanding the unique role of the CEO, of the leader, of the manager, the director, on avoiding the common pitfalls, addressing the insecurities that can impact leadership, especially when you're doing it for the first time or in a new context. So join us as we navigate those intricate dynamics of leadership at various levels and various types of business and uncover some of those hard to find and super valuable insights for leaders at any stage of their career. This is Leading with Integrity Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK, so trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Well, thank you, Chrisa, for joining me this morning. It's great to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me too. So I'm going to start us off then by letting you start us off. So if you could tell listeners a bit about yourself, your career history, what you get up to today, and what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Well, as we just discussed, coffee gets me out of bed in the morning. A wonderful oat milk latte with a little bit of agave is what inspires me to get up every day. That brings me so much joy, more joy than it probably should in the morning. But to be serious, so I do executive coaching and corporate consulting. This particular profession is more of a vocation for me. It's not something I thought I was going to be doing with my life. But when I look back at my childhood, it all makes a lot of sense. I was that little kid that adults would talk to and confide in. I wanted to sit, in like the corner of the kitchen when my mom had her friends over to hear what the adults were talking about, not because I felt excluded or wanted to be a part of the party, more because I was intrigued about what was happening in people's lives and just wanted to like understand humans and the way they thought and what made them tick. So, I got to this profession in a little bit of a round robin way. Most coaches have some other background. My background happens to be in marketing and branding for retail companies. I have a really big creative side. I never thought myself as a business person by any stretch of the imagination. And as I was growing in my career, I hit a bunch of roadblocks, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in this episode. And I had a friend that really coaxed me to get a coach. I, stubborn as ever, did not want to get a coach. And after her twisting my arm on many occasions, I decided I would get one. And the process of getting a coach radically changed my life. And through a chain of events, about 14 years ago, I decided to make this my full-time career. So here I am now. I do executive coaching, and I use that phrase loosely because most clients do come to me when they want to work on their careers, but I really take on a holistic and a little bit more of an intuitive approach with people. So we expand beyond just executive coaching. Most executive coaches really focus on hard skills and helping people, really be prepared for their next move. I go a little deeper than that. I look at really evolving people and helping them be more connected to their missions. And on the other side of the business, I do fractional COO and CSO type work. So I get to blend together my experience as an executive in my previous life, as well as all the experience in helping executives become better versions of themselves to help companies scale and grow. So that's the gist.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's something I think resonates with me, and I think quite a lot of people, particularly in sort of that early adulthood stage, we get out of college or school or whichever, and I think a lot of people face that sort of uncertainty about not really knowing what they want to do, and so just fall into the first thing they come across. And so it's quite interesting to hear as well at this stage of your career, and having done all the impressive things you've done as well, that it wasn't something you ever expected to be doing. And I think that's quite a common theme for a lot of people, isn't it?
I think so. Actually, it's funny. One of my first bosses, this is also kind of shocking. I worked in insurance. One of my first jobs, I was an admin, and I would regularly get in trouble because I wasn't sitting at my desk waiting to answer the phones. Instead, I was roaming around the office, having chats with people. I don't know what I was doing, bothering people basically. But he went to school for psychology, and here he is, an insurance salesman. And I think it's like, wait a minute, how did you make that career transition? But I think most of us, what's true is that there is a through line, or I like to call it a thread, that really connects all the things that we do. And if we consider ourselves as human beings, we're constantly evolving. So where we start off may not be where we end up. And I think that's okay. I think we've been conditioned to think we should have like linear careers. And now that we're in this post-COVID world with remote work, I think many of us are even flipping the script further to consider, what is it like for me to actually craft a career of my own making that is not even traditional, but in what I do, but even traditional in how, or not traditional how I do it. So one of the things I've been noticing in my world is many clients wanting to go fractional and really wanting to hone in on, I love doing these kinds of projects. I really know that I'm great at problem solving. I don't want to work for one outfit. I'd rather just like have a bunch of clients that I love and that be my career. So we're in an interesting time where we're like reshaping many things.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's certainly an empowering time, I think, to be able to, the internet started that revolution really, didn't it? But I think you're right. I think COVID and the whole self-isolation thing, I think that's really accelerated that change, hasn't it? Pretty clear then why you're so passionate about the executive coaching side. So what I'd love to hear a bit more about is this fractional COO and CSO. First of all, what do you mean by fractional? Because some of the listeners may not know.
Sure. So fractional is a little bit different than a consultant. So a consultant really goes in and they just provide advice and insight. They might do an intake and give you an analysis about what you should do. A fractional person does that and they help you execute. So basically a company will bring me on board either for a project or for a period of time, or even sometimes, they're a small organization or they don't have all the funds necessarily to bring in a full-time person, but they know they need somebody to support them in a particular area, or the CEO needs some support. And so they'll bring in somebody fractional, which means you're a part of the team. You do have some authority, you are leading a function, and you are required for some level of execution. It's more intense in consulting. So effectively, you have a bunch of part-time jobs and many bosses. So it does require a little bit of like balancing act, but it's very rewarding. If you're someone that loves projects and likes to go in to fix things or be supportive in some capacity, you're really able to make an impact more so than consulting. I like both sides of the work. I really enjoy going in and just consulting, but I also like to actually see the impact of the ideas and principles that I've requested companies to implement. So the fractional pieces is quite fun. Okay,
thank you. And you've answered what I was going to ask next as well. So there we go. I'll move on.
You should too.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we might already know the answer to this as well, but if you had to pick your favorite thing about what you do, what would it be out of all of these things?
Really good question. So my favorite thing, if I really ponder this for a minute, is that I have some clients that have been with me for a long time. These are more coaching clients, and some of my clients have sent me their kids. And, and most of the people that I'm talking about are very successful. They have been CEOs of large companies. They've had multi-million-dollar exits. They're like really cool, interesting people. And as part of our process, have like enjoyed the work that we've done and have wanted to set their kids up for success. And by the way, like some of these people have kids that are just dealing with post-COVID worlds, maybe even graduated during COVID, got robbed of social interaction in all the ways that happened over the last few years. And the job market is so challenging, and all of it, remote work is really hard when you're in your 20s. It's a litany of things. But my point in sharing this is that the most rewarding or favorite part of my work is that when people feel like they've gotten supported, and then they trust me with like their sister, their brother, their best friend, and even their kid to help them out. That feels quite rewarding. And like I said earlier, coaching is more of a vocation for me. So that's the ultimate like marker of success. Yes, it's fun to help a company scale and grow. It's really cool to watch someone get revenue or put a cool system in place. But the fact that people would trust me with their families feels quite special.
Yes, it's hard to think of a better reference than that, isn't it?
Yes, that's
right. Yeah. And so tell me a bit more then about the kind of companies that you've worked for over the course of your career. So you've mentioned you started out in insurance doing admin work, and I know you've done a lot of time in kind of the marketing world as well. As any other types of companies? What kind of sizes as well? Has it been all big corporate or a bit of small business?
Yeah, it's run the gamut. So my last stint in corporate America was a Fortune 500 company, like multi-billion-dollar conglomerate of huge brands. And so I have a lot of experience in managing like complex political structures. Even in a complex political structure, there's still the same sort of like dynamics. People are people, and it's just really figuring out how to like best understand what people care about to navigate them. And it still takes a different kind of finesse, if you will, in a large structure. But my last stint was in a large Fortune 500 company, and I've worked in smaller, like mid-sized companies for part of my career. And then I've also done some startups. The industries have ranged from, like I said, insurance, which was actually my first stint into marketing. I was an assistant for a long time, and then I failed at that job. I was not very good at it. And then as I was going around making friends with people, one of the agents really took to me, and he wanted me to help him transition his business. And he was acquiring another agent's business. And my job was to come up with the marketing material and get clients like wanting to like transition their business to him. And it was a very cool project, super rewarding, and I had a lot of autonomy. And that's what first got me really interested in marketing. So my experience has run the gamut. I mostly enjoy mid-sized companies. If I had to pick a spot, in large organizations, no matter how high up you are, or how influential you are, you're just still a cog in the wheel. And there's so many factors about what can impede on your success. In smaller companies, it's the same way. You're it's so turbulent, especially in startups. You're really at the mercy of, one client leaving or this round of funding coming in. And so even though when you're working really hard, it's challenging to see the progress, but mid-size is a nice, stable, less intense sort of company that you're able to actually see the fruits of your labor in terms of helping somebody grow, but you're also able to make really good impact on people. So that's where I most like to hang out.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, apart from a few temping jobs back at college and university, I've never gone big corporate. I've always worked in the small business side. And that's mostly been a conscious decision because I didn't want to be that cog lost in the machine. And I think it's nice to be able to see the impact that your work has as well on the business, which you don't necessarily get anywhere else, I think. So, the differences between all these types of companies are pretty clear. I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about some of the similarities that you've seen between the huge Fortune 500 versus the tiny little startup.
Oh, yes. So I'm a New Yorker and a Sagittarius, if you're into astrology, which means blunt is in my personality. So I'm going to be kind of blunt about this. The similarities are typically the CEO needs to get out of the way. CEOs, obviously they're in place for the right reasons, right? Like every company needs a different type of CEO. Some companies need a figurehead, some need someone that's willing to disrupt and take risks and really push an organization to do things radically different. Some just need, someone that's going to be stable and ensure the company rides out whatever waves that they're in. So, CEOs take on different forms and they're there for different reasons. But typically what will happen if a CEO is not really willing to sit in their corner and not really understand their own specific unique mix of why they're there or what purpose they serve, they get in the way of progress and they create messes. And this is true across all organizations. We feel it the most, or we see it the most quickly, if you will, in smaller and mid-sized companies. In larger companies, obviously, because of all the bureaucracy, you don't really get to see it. But that's the first piece. So CEOs not understanding their place and not knowing what they're there to do can cause lots of messes. So that's a similarity across all of them. And then the other similarity is that people are people. And they will get their feelings hurt and they will want what they want. And if we don't address people and dynamics, it doesn't matter how much money you spend on systems and process and training and development, the people will screw up whatever initiative you have. So learning how to coalesce, learning how to really develop people and take care of their needs is important.
Yeah, both of those very familiar, especially the first one. It kind of links to the second one as well. People getting their feelings hurt and people will be people and they'll react in different ways. And I think a lot of particularly in the smaller businesses, it's very easy to react negatively when that CEO doesn't quite understand their role. Because as you say, you see the impact faster and it has more of an impact, I think, in terms of over the whole organization.
Yes, the CEO can cause massive swings in like a 80-person company, right? Or even a 3,000-person company versus in one that has 20,000 people. You won't really see it as much, but still, they still can cause some challenges. So yeah, that would be the similarities. And then if I can add on to that,
go on.
There's a great Instagram quote. Not to bring in almighty Instagram here, but I saw this quote a while ago and it was quite fitting. So one of the things that the quote said is, when you get into a new relationship, the question you should ask yourself is, how will my insecurities destroy this relationship? And it's a little heavy, but I paused on this quote for a minute and I thought about it because it's actually very true. What will happen for most people, especially CEOs or leaders of companies or even leaders of teams, is that, we all have insecurities. We're human. We all have things that we doubt about ourselves and, things that we would rather hide or not proud of, or faults and flaws that aren't very redeeming. I certainly have them. lots of them. We can talk about them if you like, David. But the reason why I bring up this quote is because oftentimes I will see one of two things happen in leaders. When someone is feeling insecure, they either lean into becoming very anxious, which means they tend to be more micromanaging. They require being in the loop a lot. They want to be involved in everything. And so that like insecurity of like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm anticipating problems. I'm very nervous. I want to like control everything or be a part of things. If I'm a part of it, then it won't go badly. This kind of thinking really does sabotage progress and makes people feel overwhelmed. And actually, it's the leadership style that's most connected to burnout in employees. On the other side of the equation, there are leaders that tend to be more avoidant. They tend to kind of withdraw. They're not that engaged. They'd rather, they kind of do the laissez-faire, or what is the free-range parenting version of leadership, right? They do this like, okay, people over there. And then because they're so disengaged, they're not really leading, but then they can kind of zoom in and then zoom out. And when they zoom in, it causes a mess and everyone's like, oh my God, we have to pay attention because they're speaking about what they want. And now they're upset we did it wrong. And so then it creates this like very like turbulent up and down sort of environment. And so I think it's important for people, as you're in leadership, or if you're thinking about being in leadership, to really consider how will your insecurities get in the way. I will tell you that for me, in my first leadership roles, I was definitely the anxious person, wanting to be in everything. And so that caused problems. But I think it's paramount for us to keep in mind sometimes our innate reactions to things aren't the best, and understanding how we lean can make a big difference in whether or not we are successful. Yes.
I think I'm probably the same. I think I was probably the anxious one as well. I certainly, wanting to be involved in everything and needing to know everything and all of that. And I think for me, it was also linked to confidence as well, especially in my much earlier career. You wouldn't know it now, of course, he says.
Yes, I can tell it.
Well, it's easy one-to-one and on the internet, isn't it? It's not the same as in person. What I find quite interesting as well, and I won't say his name, but there was one leader I worked with who actually had both of those. Mm-hmm. And so there would be the kind of the avoidance of just not showing up to work for just days and days on end. Mm. And then on the maybe 1 or 2 days a week that they were there, they did the other way, and there was the constant micromanagement, the copy me in on all the emails, make sure I know everything, I make all the decisions, no one else can. Yes. And we sort of swung between those two extremes.
Yes.
And that went on for a quite a long period of time, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah. It's very turbulent when that happens, right? You're like, what are we doing? What's going on? And then finally, no progress is made. And that's another way. We talked earlier about one of the similarities amongst the companies that like the CEOs can get in the way. But like the truth is, anyone in a leadership position that has some level of authority, because leadership positions come in different sizes, right? We can have authority in something and not be responsible, right? We can have accountability, but no authority. So it can all kind of like blend. But when someone has authority, whether that means you're leading this team or leading the company, we really can cause a lot of like damage, actually, if we're not managing ourselves and being responsible with how we are showing up and how we're leading people.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why things like being a bit transparent, even vulnerability, definitely authenticity, leading by example, these kind of leadership behaviors are so important. And that self-awareness element as well, I think really helps leaders who are struggling with these issues to kind of get to grips with what the problem is. And then they can do the other things I just mentioned to make sure that they're not imposing those problems upon their team.
That's right.
So thinking back then to your experiences as a first-time manager, and then maybe comparing that to later in your career as a senior executive, and maybe even now with the work you do as a fractional C-suite person, what do you see as the main differences and similarities between leadership at those different levels?
I think that the main similarity is that you need to care about your people. And there's a difference between leadership and management, right? So management is being able to get things done, follow a process, understand the order of operations, push things through, create efficiency and productivity. Most people can manage pretty easily because it requires just following a blueprint. Leadership is not that simple. Each person is different. What motivates and inspires one person is not going to work for another. And leaders are ineffective in getting results out of people because they're not exactly sure how to tap into what matters most for them. So the similarity across all of it is understanding your people and caring about them and caring about what they care about. That's the best way to get to good results. I don't know if there are many differences, actually. The truth is that, I think when you're leading, well, let me say it this way. I think the differences lie in the type of person that you're leading. So one of the principles I teach to all my clients, some of them know this already, but most people know it intuitively, not necessarily like consciously, is this idea of situational leadership. So it's a model in which the premise holds that there is no one right way to lead anyone. And depending on someone's skill set and their specific confidence level, and depending on what you Google and what you read about, they use different words. So, this is not a direct quote of like the model that was created by the organizational psychologist, I believe in like the 80s, actually, or 70s. Basically, the premise being is that understanding where someone lies at the intersection of their confidence level and their skill level is paramount to best leading them. And so one of the things that is the difference is that the higher up you become in leadership, in theory, you lead more confident people or more competent people with better skills. And that is true overall. But what we forget is that when a leader, let's just say I went into a new company and I'm going to be the vice president of this particular division. Well, I might have a lot of skills, but I'm completely green in this environment. And I do not know anyone, and I don't have the politics, and I don't understand how things operate. And your system, while I can figure it out, I still don't know it. So actually, what's true about me is that I'm not someone that can just be left to roam around and figure it out on my own. My boss, my leader, would need to really actually develop me. I'm going to require coaching in that instance. I'm going to require someone to like help me think through and understand and, figure out how to position myself. And a big downfall that I see in companies is that we will hire people who are senior, quote unquote, and we kind of let them just roam. And then we are pissed at their results. We're like, oh, they didn't build good relationships, or they're not really getting this, or they're taking too long to figure it out. And we forget that when we're in a new scenario, we require a different type of leadership. And I think even for those of us placed in those positions, sometimes I think we feel ashamed, or like if we ask for help or say we need ABC, whatever it might be, we're going to be looked at as we were a bad hire or that we're a fraud. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that as you're leading people, understanding where they fall at that intersection and providing them what they need, because it's easy for us to go, okay, this intern out of college doesn't know what they're doing. They need a lot of directive behavior. I need to delegate to them. I need to check their work. True. But it's a lot harder when we're bringing in like a director or a VP, and we forget like they may have been a director or VP for 20 years. And we forget that actually they might need some directive behavior, they might need some coaching. They can't just fly. And I think when we figure that out and support people, and we can be as leaders nimble and give people what they need, we get better results, less turnover, and less like challenging dynamics. And then also for ourselves, when we're in a company and we're leaders going in, knowing what to ask for from our superiors and making sure that we're not feeling guilty if we're not feeling as confident also allows us to be set up for success.
I think you started off there with that being a difference, but I think it ended up as a similarity, didn't it?
It did. Well, we went all the way from one extreme to the other. I'm calling it a difference because I think what happens as we grow in our careers, the difference is the type and caliber of person you're working with. But I think the premise remains the same, right? So I think you'll experience having to lead people in different ways. Like, for example, a big challenge actually in the workforce is that younger leaders leading older people. So this whole idea of generational challenges inside the workplace is a real problem, and I actually experienced this in my earlier career. One of the reasons why I got into coaching is because I was a young leader, and I inherited a team that was mostly male, and they were all older than me. And I was really struggling. And how do you lead people that have more experience than you, more wisdom than you? And, as we get older, we kind of know how to navigate these things. But when we were first encountering these challenges, it's really hard. So I think it all becomes a little nuanced. And the more we can really think through how we manage that nuance, the better we will be. And also, again, because leadership is impacting people's lives directly, the better impact you have in people's lives. You cause a little bit less damage.
The generational point, I think, can be especially contentious. And I think wisdom as well, that interesting that you chose that word, because I think that can be quite loaded as well in a generational context. And I think what core of the problem that we're talking about here in all of this is about the assumptions that the leader goes into it with. So you're talking about as a difference, the type of people you're managing. I think the difference there is the assumption that most people make when they're leading more experienced people, more senior in their careers, is that, as you say, they are going to be more confident, they are going to be more competent, they're going to be more experienced. But that's not necessarily the case, is it? I mean, they might have the experience. It doesn't mean they'll be good at this job just because they were good at the last job, any more than a first-time new manager is going to be any good at doing that job just because they were good at their last job when they weren't responsible for people. And I think that is quite an interesting dynamic, quite an interesting similarity. And then the wisdom point, I don't know, this might expose one of my own biases when I say this, but I don't like the automatic assumption that age breeds wisdom. I agree you can't get wisdom unless you survive long enough to get the experience to build it, but I don't know that they're that directly connected.
I think that's a really fair point, actually. I agree. One of the things I talk about is just because someone is 55 and has this title does not mean they're professionally mature, right? Just doesn't. We hope it does, but it doesn't. So I think the component here of wisdom, I think, has to also tie to that professional maturity, right? And so I think when we talk about being wise, we're able to see things outside of ourselves. We're able to really understand nuance and complex matters and be able to offer insight that is not based on my own experience, right? So I always say this to my clients. If I'm working with you, if I experience you being late for a call and I say, okay, you were late and it really bothered me, you were late, that's just me giving you the impact of what you did for me, what happened to me. But if I notice that you've been late and you come to the call and you tell me why you were late because you were hungry and you grabbed food and you were late, my feedback to you might be hey, actually, I'm thinking you probably need to build in time for eating because that's causing you to be late. So perhaps we have to look at is self-care and prioritizing that. So now the wisdom in that is that I'm observing that for you don't prioritize self-care, then you're running late to everything and then you feel bad and then everything has a snowball effect. So can we just talk about your self-care? That's wisdom. That has nothing to do with me, right? That has nothing to do with the fact that you were late and I'm annoyed because I've been waiting for 5 minutes, right? Nothing. So I think that's a maturity, being able to take yourself out of something and to see something clearly, not just how it impacts you, because two things can be true at once. So when I talk about wisdom, that's what I mean. And it's true, just because you've been in a role for a long time does not mean, or you're older, does not mean you have that ability to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you say there was the example you gave was the 20 years experience as an executive moving to a new job. And I mean, if they've spent that whole 20 years in the same company doing the same processes, they've known all the people for decades, and then they've moved to a new role in a different company, they're still going to be a fish out of water, aren't they? So they're still going to need a lot more support than you might expect. And I think that's why I really like situational leadership, actually, and this idea that context matters, and you've got to be aware of that context as a leader and ensure that you are reacting to it appropriately, but also that there's no one size fits all. Every person is an individual, and that is not just about their personalities, it's about their experiences at work and what they might struggle with one day versus the next day.
Yeah, that is true.
I really like the professional maturity as well. I much prefer that to wisdom. That's a much nicer way of saying it.
We'll scratch wisdom from our record.
It's still a good word. I think it's just, maybe it's me, but it feels a bit loaded.
I get it. And I will say, being someone that grew up in corporate America at a young age and being exposed to, I reported directly into the CEO, right? And like had sat in board meetings as a very young person and had a lot of wisdom, actually more, so if I use that word, more professional maturity than a lot of my colleagues sitting around those tables. And so it's not an age thing at all. But it is a maturity thing. I think people become mature in different ways. I think some people have more access to maturity because of whatever's happened in their upbringing. I think some of us become mature because we're ambitious and we understand what we need to do and be in order to like operate in certain circles. So I think this is something that gets developed over time. I can completely understand why it's a trigger word in every way.
Sorry, yeah.
Bring it on.
Yeah. No, I think that, I guess what I try to do is disconnect it from age in either direction. I think, the same thing, about assuming that someone older is going to struggle with technology. I mean, that's just as bad a bias to me as assuming they're going to be wise.
Yes, exactly. Agreed. Absolutely.
Equally, the most professional people I've ever worked with have nearly always been younger than me. Mm-hmm. They've always been more skilled than me, obviously. And they've always been easier to work with, I found, as well, than the worst ones who've quite often been older, but not always.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough about my biases.
I was enjoying talking about your biases. We can have a whole unconscious bias conversation.
Yeah. But see, it's not unconscious, is it? Because I know about it.
Yes.
Oh, dear me. Let's get into a bit more on leadership then, in a bit more detail. And apologies if you've already answered this, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Okay.
What would you say is the most important leadership lesson that you've learned from your career so far?
What comes to mind at the moment is that everyone just needs to be heard. And I'm putting myself in my fractional seat as well, because a lot of times I go into companies and, there's a very successful CEO, or there's someone's been running a company for a long time. Maybe it's their baby and they've built it from the ground up. And, everyone has struggles and challenges in their business and then in their personal lives. And we cannot, by the way, compartmentalize it. It's not possible. We keep, in our capitalistic world, we really want to separate it out and have people be machines. You're not. That's not true. So it's impossible to be in a fight with your best friend or your spouse and try to be the best leader today. It's just not the way we work. And the energy to compartmentalize in of itself takes away from your ability to be attuned and in the moment and creative. So either way, we can't separate out. So learning how to integrate being who you are at work is important. But anyways, I digress. The answer to the question is that I think people just need to be heard. And if you listen to people and what they're saying, number one, they don't need much more than that, actually. One of the most important lessons I learned in coaching is when someone's talking to you, you need to actually be able to reflect back to them that they make sense. Because everyone from their perspective makes sense, right? And so I think if you get on people's level, whatever the level that might be, you're able to create a bigger impact. The people will feel supported. They will feel like they're not talking to you while they will feel validated. And that does enough for psychological safety that then actually has people be able to show up in different ways. But because the minute we don't feel psychologically safe, it then puts us in all of our defense mechanisms. So some people will be combative, some people will withdraw, some people will just be destructive. So helping facilitate that safety is important on all levels. So that's been my biggest lesson.
Yeah, 100%. And thinking back as well to what we were talking about just now, a big part about the listening aspect of it is knowing what questions to ask in order to elicit the opportunity to listen. And with the context and the situational piece and how everyone's different as an individual, some people will not volunteer the answers to the questions that you might need to know as a leader. So I think there is an art form there as well about knowing when and what to ask in order to make sure that they have the opportunity to feel heard.
Yes, I agree. And I will add to that, sometimes not wanting to know the information, right? Sometimes just being relaxed about it. I feel a lot of times leaders want to go in and make people feel safe, and I'm putting that in quotations, You try to make someone feel safe. You're like wanting to know that you are safe and they can talk to you and it's okay. And please tell me. And that in of itself causes some pressure. And so there really is this like, and I'm going to be very coachy for a minute, but there's ability to hold space for people that if you just hold space, people will open up. And that is a very neutral kind of energy versus like, I want to know, I'm here to help you. Like, that's good. And that works sometimes. But more often, just the holding space and being available and receptive. There's a great, in couples therapy, there's a great acronym, ARE. Have you heard of this before?
No, new one to me.
Okay, so you're all going to get couples therapy coaching on this too. So ARE stands for Are You There? And when we are trying to create safety in any relationship, what's most important is available, receptive, and emotionally engaged. And being available is actually obviously being there and present. And not hard to pin down, right? So if we want to talk about people feeling really confident that they can come talk to their leaders about whatever challenges they have and how to be a good leader, that needs to be established. If you're too busy, too distracted, impossible to reach, always rescheduling, you're failing at the availability. Receptive is being able to hear people. That was the piece I said earlier, like hearing them, acknowledging that they make sense, and getting that from the perspective they have some valid point in argument, even though they could be completely flawed in all their facts, right? And then the emotionally engaged piece is a little bit about just making sure you're showing up and you're like making eye contact and your body language is good and that your tone is right and all these things that like make people feel safe in the moment. But also emotionally engaged is that you're mirroring them, right? If someone's in pain or stressed or overwhelmed, you're able to really kind of like match their energy. I often, and a lot of times in what I do for work, I will mediate difficult conversations with partners or, you know, a CEO and a senior leader in the organization. And I will watch the CEO be annoyed when their senior person or the partner be annoyed when their other partner is like, I'm stressed. I'm going to burn out soon. And they're like, how can you be so stressed out? Like, I'm stressed out too. It's a natural reaction, right? We want to save our reputation with other people. But the minute we try to save our own reputation, we completely dismiss their reality and it creates this rift. So I like to use the ARE in my coaching with people. It helps sort of like level set how to be and show up. But that would be the most important leadership component there, is like just getting people to feel heard.
I like it. Yeah, I'd not heard it before, but it kind of reminded me of a few conversations I've had earlier this year. One in particular with a guy called Tom, who does a lot of work with introversion. And I think when you talk about trying to make people feel safe, as though you're kind of like almost not threatening, but kind of imposing safety upon them when they might not actually want to hear it right now. And I think that mirrors a lot of the conversations about introversion as well, because there, again, you know, there is that assumption that if somebody has a problem, they will tell you. But that actually isn't always true. For a lot of people, telling you could be the worst part of the problem. Exactly. So I think leaders need to have that awareness that not everyone's brains work in the same way, not everyone's personalities are the same. And for some people, just because you sit in a meeting and say, does anyone have a problem with that? And then assume that a silent room means no, nobody does. That's not the case. There could be somebody there who's just not able to say it in that room. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to look for alternative opportunities as well. You've got to give people more than that. And I think I love that idea of kind of creating that empty space, the comfortable silence, if you like, which is another thing that's really interesting about introversion versus extroversion, isn't it? Because, you know, one of those is very comfortable with silence and the other one is absolutely not.
Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Me personally, I'm not actually sure. I think I swing between them depending on the context.
Yeah, I'm with you. I swing too. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's ambivert or omnivert. I can't remember what the definitions of those two were. But anyway, it's one of them. Yeah, I think it's ambivert. You can kind of be either one.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, 5 or 10 years ago, I was 100% introvert, but that was because of the context.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. You know, when I was younger, and if I was going to go to a party, I would need to go to the bathroom and just like sit there by myself for like 10 minutes just to decompress. I didn't realize how much I absorbed people's energy how like I needed a moment to decompress for that. So now that I know that about myself, I'm better able to manage like it's not necessarily overwhelm. It's like an overload of like too much. And part of that is because I tend to be very empathetic and I'm very good at like relating to people. So then people typically want to come talk to me. And so there's a lot of me giving and a lot of output of energy, and I need to restore that. So I've learned to manage my social interactions.
Well, there you go. See, I just wouldn't have gone to the party.
Got it. You would have been home. Although I have to tell you that in high school, my favorite thing to do was go to the bookstore and get like a bunch of books and put them on my bed and then like figure out the process by which I was going to read them like on a Saturday night. It made me very happy.
Yes. Oh, very similar, actually. Bookshops are always the favourite place. Sadly, a habit I've not been able to keep up. Like I keep buying books. I just never get to read them anymore.
Oh, got it. Yes.
Yeah, but that's just life as a business owner and solopreneur, isn't it? You've got to prioritise your time sometimes.
That's right.
Listeners, I was making a sad face then because you won't be able to see it. Anyway. Okay, so kind of an opposite question then. What would you say is the biggest mistake that most leaders will make?
They will get too caught in their own agendas. I have seen this time and time again. Leaders are visionaries, right? We don't become leaders of anything without having sold somebody on our ability to create change or make an impact or anything of like sort of a big dream, right? So, and the dream is great. We need to have it. That's why a leader is there. That's why you're not just the manager and just driving process. But sometimes we can get very caught up in our own agendas and make it about what we want, what we think things should look like, how we think it should go. And we can almost be, is it Hamlet or Othello, blind ambition, right? I forgot which play it is. And that's a big downfall.
Another interesting thread, I think, that's running through here about transformation and change. And I think there is something there about setting the vision or having the vision and knowing the general direction and why. But I think the other aspect, which again, it's the thread of running through of what we've been talking about already, is about how you actually achieve that change. And I think the getting lost in your own agenda is part of maybe it's the other side of the same coin. I don't know, but it's this idea where the leader has decided what the change is going to be, what it must be, and is therefore going to make that happen. Whereas actually the most successful change programs certainly are the ones where everyone's involved in setting that direction, at the very least in the how we're going to achieve it piece. And I think, again, it speaks to the listening aspect, the understanding what each individual part of that team needs as well from their leader, and communication as well, of course, is a really vital aspect of leadership as well. And I've always found, it is a bit of a cliche statement, isn't it? But I've always found this kind of idea of having a change done to you instead of done by you is pretty much a recipe for failure. Again, maybe I'm biased by my experiences there. I don't know.
No, I mean, we can't help but be biased, right? Our experience shape our worldview. So it makes sense that, we'd have opinions based on what we've experienced. Yeah. I think earlier when you were speaking, what came to mind for me is like vigilante leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I've had I experience this actually often in my coaching. I've had a lot of people that I've worked with in coaching who are like, I saved that client, I saved their business, this kind of like, if it wasn't for me. And the truth is like, that's going to be further from the truth. No one person, aside from our own lives, by the way, and whatever we decide to like do for ourselves, can actually save another person, another company, another thing, another project. We don't operate by ourselves. And so whenever we are in vigilante leadership in this way, we're literally doing the opposite of leading. So I think that's an important piece. And I think many people who get into leadership are put in leadership because they are visionary, they can drive results, they are ambitious. People do admire them. They are charismatic. And it can get to our heads sometimes, I think. But important that piece of humility, you're talking about important leadership qualities. One of my most important leadership qualities that I teach people is humility. That is that you are equally able to own where you are amazing as you are to own where you are not so amazing. And I think balancing out your leadership with that goes a very long way.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, I love the whole humble leader thing. Yeah, really, really powerful approach. And I think the real trick to it is being able to do it in a way that is genuine. I've seen probably 50-50 success rate I've seen where people have realized that that's an important thing, but they can't quite pull it off and people don't quite believe them. And so it ends up being disastrous.
Well, yeah, because people can read through bullshit, right? So you said earlier as well, authenticity. You can't just try to check the box on some of these things. If we're talking about being a person, it's like dating somebody. You will feel that someone is just trying to like check the box with you or placate you. It will not land the same when someone says, I'm sorry you feel that way versus like, I'm sorry I did that to you. It just won't. So we leak out what we really mean. And that typically may not be overt and it may not be something we see automatically, but something feels off in the interaction. So yes, we do need to be authentic and mean it, which is why I think being a leader is so challenging because you can't pretend. And it's funny because a lot of the attributes we look for in leaders is almost like a performance, right? That they're strong, that they're powerful, that they're charismatic, or whatever the situation might entail. Sometimes situation entails just like decisive, right? And direct, but you can't perform your way through that. At some point, it catches up with you.
It always reminds me of another cliche about always tell the truth, because then you've only got to remember one thing. As opposed to always tell the same lie, then you still have to remember one thing, don't you?
Yes.
I think we just found a flaw there. We'll ignore the flaw. But then again, again, going back to everyone's different, I think every leader is different as well. And for some people, that kind of constant pressure to maybe not to be authentic, but to be vulnerable, to tell people what's going on and how they're feeling about everything, that can be exhausting just by itself sometimes. So I think, as with all things, there is a question of balance, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely.
What's been your best experience of being led?
I've been very lucky. I've had some awesome bosses. And specifically, one of my bosses, this is like I would think of her often, and we're not connected anymore. It's been many years now, but I remember she came into a company that I was working in, and the structure was really messy at the time, and I didn't have a boss for a long time. And she came in, and she really took an interest in me, and she cared about me and wanted to know what I was doing and what mattered, and she involved me. So she created a sense of belonging that I didn't quite have. The role that I had at the time was ancillary in some way. It wasn't considered like a business necessary function, even though it was one. The way that the organization looked at it was not that, but she did understand the importance of the role that I held. And then she created this beautiful sense of belonging, and she championed me. And I remember one time we were having a conversation, and I talk about this when I lead workshops around asking for equal pay and negotiating specifically for women. I remember one time it was review season, and I had gone to the copier and I saw someone's review with their salary. They just happened to leave it there. And I was really upset. The person was making way more money than me, doing way less work. I had a lot higher title, all the things. And I went to her and I was like, look, that's not fair. And she completely agreed. But more so than agreeing, she actually went to bat for me. And a few months later, she walks into my office and she slides me a paper. And I'm like, what is this? And she's like, that's your new salary increase. And it was again, now looking back, it wasn't a lot of money. But the fact that many months after we talked about it, I had done my review, she had given me a regular increase, whatever was standard of the, in terms of the budget that the company had given her and all the things, she continued to go to bat for me. And that is something that always stuck with me, because I think that when you are in leadership, we do need to advocate for our people. And when we do that, it's not about the money, it's about the effort. And when people feel invested in, they are very loyal and you get better results from them. And then by the way, that behavior made me want to pay it forward to other people. And so I think, I was taught a really valuable lesson for how to be as a person and as an executive by watching her care.
That's hit so many of the key leadership behaviors in one story, though. And if we're playing cliche bingo as well at the end there, I think, great leaders create other leaders. And I think that's kind of the epitome of that story there, isn't it? Is how that behavior, how that caring, how giving you that kind of the top cover, going to bat for you. All of these things have resulted in you wanting to emulate that, to become a better leader yourself, to pay it forward, to all of those other things. And it's kind of becomes a self-fulfilling story of leadership, doesn't it? Over sort of professional generations, let's call them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really lovely story. I like that. I'm going to ask a question about time travel now, because why not? If you had a time machine and if you could go back in time, how far back in your life would you go? And what advice would you give to your younger self?
So I would go back to like 17. And at the time, so just quickly about my background, my parents are immigrants to the US. They are from Greece. They didn't have a lot of education. My dad's very entrepreneurial and ambitious. So a lot of my drive comes from him. But they, wanted us to be very happy. And for them, my sister and I having like very stable jobs and like living in America and having access to all the things that we have access to was sufficient. But they really did warn against risk. And then what they were warning against was like, we tried to make ourselves so comfortable. You don't have to make yourself uncomfortable to be happy, right? Like that was like their underlying message. And that is great and true. But for me, what that produced is like, I was very scared to take risks. And so then I played very small. I didn't do all the things like join certain clubs. I didn't travel. I didn't get engaged in certain activities. I really just tried to follow like this like specific narrow path that I thought was like the only path I can follow because that's all I was capable of. And then because I had no one supporting like take the risk, I very much just sort of sat in like, it's okay because I'm getting validated for doing this particular narrow path. And so I'd go back to myself and say, do all the stupid things you want to do. All of them. Every single one, do not miss out on one, get drunk at that party, flunk out of the class, go on that class trip, go to that school, like all the things, do them all. And I, in recent life, have done that and have really been like, you know what, I'm just going to take that risk. I'm going to try that thing. I'm going to talk to that person. So I've since evolved it, but I really wish that I can go back because I'd be curious to see where I would have ended up and just what experiences would have come about.
That's a very unusual answer to this question. I don't think I've had one like that before.
Yeah.
It's normally about a very specific thing as opposed to just do all the stuff that you were too scared to do or too risk averse. Yeah, that would be a very interesting outcome to see. I agree with you. Mind you, I mean, this is the danger of time travel, isn't it? You might end up much worse off and not enjoying your life as much as you are now. So who can tell? Hey.
That's right. Yeah. I think, given that what I do for work and watching people really try to like think through like every possible iteration of something and like which way it's going to go and analysis by paralysis and trying to mitigate risk and like understand worst case scenario. And I work with a lot of analytics, right? Most of my clients are lawyers or doctors or financial people. And so they're always using like cerebral analysis to decide how they're going to do something. I think at some point it's just like, you don't know, like you might, like, it's just like, go see what happens. And there is something in that like, it's almost the oxymorons of life, right? When you let go, everything comes to you. When you're not trying, it's easy, like all these things. And I think that's part of what I'm saying. Part of what I'm saying is that I really tried to like do everything sort of right and like be smart and conscious. And that definitely paid off. But I just wonder if I was a little bit more in the moment and, for lack of a cliche, in flow, what life would have looked like.
Yeah, I guess there's parts of it you might have enjoyed more at the time, maybe.
I definitely would have had more fun, but I did enjoy my books. I have to say, I did enjoy sitting and reading my books on political science and archaeology. They were good.
Well, fair enough.
Leadership Heroes.
Last question I have for you. I have to ask it because everyone has to answer this one. It's called Leadership Heroes. And so the question is, if you had to pick one person, they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
It's really hard to say in perfectly embody leadership. That's a very challenging. I'm going to say Nelson Mandela. And I'm sure people have picked him in the past for various reasons. But the reason why I pick him is because he was a unifier, and he clearly had a vision and a mission. So he was able to hold this idea, and many people might say very utopian idea of what life could look like. But he was willing to like self-sacrifice for his vision, and he was a unifier. But he was also fallible, right? He had a really kind of crappy personal life, from his marriages to his kids. And so one of the reasons why I pick him is because I think we try to put people in positions that would equal pedestals when we think about leaders. And I really love to look at people in their humanity. And I think Mandela really does represent like human. And for me, the best leaders are human. We're able to be a little messy. We're able to like have a shit show in our life. We're able to cause a big impact and like do great for others, and then be just, sleeping in on Saturday or whatever it might be. So that's why I pick him. I feel like he didn't try to hide his humanness, and that is in of itself a vulnerable act and authentic act. So he's my choice.
It's a good choice that we've had before. You're right. I think your reasoning is different though, so that's good. He is such an interesting character. I think there's so many contrasts in his life, even in terms of like his political life as well, not just his personal life. But I think a really interesting question to me is, at what point in that life did he actually become a leader?
Mm-hmm.
And that we could debate for hours, and we don't have time, sadly. But it is an interesting academic thought exercise, I suppose.
Yes, very true. I enjoy all your poignant questions. It's a good one, right? And it's also just based on what we spoke about. At what point in our life did we become leaders?
Mm-hmm.
Was it when we got that title or that money or that job, or did it happen before that? Or how do we view ourselves? Like interesting, reflective question in general.
Yeah, definitely. I'd actually most like to hear what his answer to the question would have been as well.
Totally.
And how he viewed that, because you got to wonder. I think he was probably the first to admit about the mistakes he'd made. Yeah. Anyway, sadly, we'll never know.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We have run over a little bit, so I won't keep you much longer. Just to say, if any of the listeners would like to learn more about what you do, get in touch with you, maybe work with you, would you like to point them towards a website?
Yes, certainly. So you can find me. My website is ChrisaZBoyce.com. So it's CHRISA, Z as in zebra, B as in boy, OYCE.com. And then also I'm on LinkedIn under the same name. If you need anything or curious about more about what I do, that's where you can go.
Lovely. Well, Chrisa, thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you today.
Same. Thank you too. It was riveting. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise. It's been great. Well, listener, that is the end of a month-long The Heart of Leadership mini-series. I hope you found these episodes useful and enriching and educational, or at the very least, interesting. I certainly have all of the above. We kicked off the series and the month of November with a great chat with Pierre about why people have to be the center of any successful strategy, whether it be customer focus, customer service, or leadership and getting the most from your team. From there, we went straight to the insights into trust building with Natalie Doyle-Oldfield, and then again onto Adrian Knight's journey through 12 failed startups. We spoke to Dr. Ravi Iyer last week about his experiences as an inventor and a medical practitioner, and the lessons learned about human ingenuity and leadership and people and life. And it's been a unique exploration of the nuances of leadership and the primary role that putting your people first has to take in any successful approach. Today's conversation with Chrisa has hopefully tied several of those themes together and how you can best serve your people. And if you've missed any of the episodes from the series, they are, of course, all available in the archives. You can find them very easily at the usual place. It's www.leadernotaboss.com. You may also find on some of the social media this week a link to a playlist of just that mini-series. So if you just want to listen to November's episodes, you can find that as well. Thank you again so much to Chrisa for her time today and for being so open with her stories and sharing her experiences. If you would like to learn more about her and what she does, again, you'll find the link in the episode description. So click on that, take a look, maybe reach out to her as well. Listener, once again, as I do every week, thank you for listening. Thank you for continuing to support Leading with Integrity. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you want to have a chat about leadership anytime, or maybe if you want to consider being on the podcast as well. Always happy to hear from people about that. And don't forget, you can currently sign up to the Integrity Leaders online leadership community. You'll get 2 months for free in return for your feedback. If you want to know more about that, again, get in touch. You'll find all of my details in the episode description as well. It'd be great to hear from you, and I look forward to welcoming you into the community. Join us again next week. We'll be kicking off another themed month, and this time we'll be focusing on tech-related topics as far as they impact leadership. So we'll be kicking that off with a conversation with the very excellent Mr. Justin Tan, and he'll be telling us all about his work in the AI and digital transformation space, the experiences he's had with leadership and the various leaders he's worked with whilst doing that, as well as in his earlier career. And of course, as ever, we'll be talking about all the lessons that we can draw from that as leaders and as new managers. So I hope you'll be able to join us again next week. It's going to be a really good conversation. I'm really looking forward to that one. And that's it from me today. So until I speak to you again, remember, be a leader, not a boss.